Hey guys, sorry I'm not there today, but hopefully we can still go over everything we need, which is the basics of biology. So before we get too far into it, if you've not already taken your quizzy, make sure to go ahead and get that done. Then quick lecture, and then you'll have an activity to finish out, which will be due tomorrow night at midnight. Also, don't forget about your stats project. So just some quick updates and reminders. If you have any late work or anything that's not finished or anything that was not submitted as a PDF, make sure to get that in by Friday and I won't count it as late. If it's coming in after Friday, however, it will be docked half credit. And just a reminder, if you're doing anything on paper, please submit that as a PDF in a single document. And if you don't remember how to do that, that was in the first day folder. So quick reminder there. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I have updated Brainscapes, and what I'm going to encourage you to do is go ahead and go into this program and do some reviewing. It's a really nice program because what it allows you to do is rate yourself for each flashcard that you look at. So every time you say 5, that means you know it really well. Every time you say you're a 1, that means you don't know it so well. And those 1s and 2s are going to keep cropping back up, so you really get a chance to practice them. And then the 4s and 5s become less and less frequent. So take a look at that. All right, so when we're talking about what life is, you saw in your textbook that there's kind of like this list, and you may have seen in other textbooks that list is a little bit different, and even in other textbooks, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I need you to make sure to understand. I don't need you to memorize all of these. As long as you understand that life revolves around being able to first exist, from that, be able to survive, and if you can survive, thrive. That's what's going to allow for the continuity of life. So when I talk about life existing, we need something that's going to separate the environment from whatever life there is, right? Whatever chemical reactions are going on, and that's going to be in the way of cells. So we're going to have some kind of barrier, in this case a cell membrane, that's separating this little bag of chemical reactions, right? The inside from the outside. A quick note about what types of life do exist. All life is cellular, and it's either going to be made out of prokaryotic cells, which are the really, really simple ones with no complex organelles, or eukaryotic cells. And of the eukaryotes, there are organized organisms that are unicellular and multicellular. So if you can first exist, right, you're made out of cells, then you need to survive because otherwise that's not life, right? So a big piece of this is going to be able to make sure whatever is going on inside that little bag of chemicals is different from the surroundings. You have different chemicals, different concentrations of those chemicals, and different chemical reactions going on. And so we're going to call that homeostasis, is keeping the chemical reactions inside different than what's going on the outside. And so all of that is controlled by DNA, and we'll see DNA coming back in the next piece here. Like I said, conditions have to be stable and different than the environment, called homeostasis. You have to be able to sense that there are changes so that if you start going out of whack, something can be recognized and a mechanism can be used to get you back into that kind of stable baseline set of chemicals or set of conditions. And then finally, all of that's going to take quite a bit of energy to be able to do. And so we need a constant supply in of nutrients, which are going to include a lot of energy-rich chemical bonds. And then we also have to a way to get rid of waste. So once you've survived, if you can thrive, then life can continue. And this is all about being able to get in more energy and matter than what you use. If you can do that, then you can grow and develop. Remember that growth refers to a cell getting larger, or in a multicellular organism is going to refer to a cell that is dividing, and now you have the organism being made out of more cells. Reproduction is going to involve taking the DNA and passing that along, and because that DNA is constantly undergoing slight changes, evolution will occur, which is a shift in species. So not individuals. I cannot emphasize this enough when we talk about development. We're talking about change over an individual's lifetime, whereas evolution is going to be a change over a species kind of lifetime, right? Over generations. Okay, if we think of this like a business, you've got to exist, you've got to survive, you've got to thrive. So existing, get the walls set up, establish what your business is. To survive, you need a constant influx of the right kind of inventory. You need to take into consideration what's selling, what's not, and you have to have that constant cash flow. And if you're, breaking even, you can survive, but to thrive, that's going to mean more money coming in and you're utilizing everything really well. And maybe you can start new businesses or new locations, right? So nice little analogy there for you. Okay, so when we study life, we talk about levels of organization. And throughout this, I want you to keep in mind something called emergent properties. And what this is referring to is the idea that very, very simple things, when they come together, make something that's more complex than just those two things have come together. So keep that in mind as I'm going through, and I'll give you some examples. So let's start out with molecular biology. When we talk about molecular biology, we're talking about the atom, right? Atom is pretty simple. Things like carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, but when they start coming together to form molecules, where now you have chemical bonds, those molecules have properties that the atoms themselves didn't have. So for example, when we look at H2O or water, that is going to have all kinds of properties related to it, sticking it to itself and really being able to support life on Earth. So simple atoms make molecules that are more complex than the atoms themselves would suggest. From there, molecules can be built into really big molecules, things like DNA. And DNA obviously has a ton of properties that go far beyond what any of the component molecules are made out of, okay? From that, we get into cellular biology, and there are some cells that are really just macromolecules that are assembled into the cell, and that cell still has slightly different regions, but overall pretty simple. So the very earliest cells on Earth would have had this kind of structure, but for the most part, we look at macromolecules forming into what are called organelles. Organelles are the little organs that do particular jobs within the cells, and then the cells make up the unit of life. Now, those organelles can be very simple or membrane bound. We're going to talk about more about that when we get into this cell unit. Okay, as I mentioned, prokaryote versus eukaryote. Moving on. From here, we can start looking at building an organism. So the cells can be the organism itself, or cells can build into tissues. Those tissues can build into organs, organs into organ systems. And not all organisms have all of these layers, okay? For example, amoeba. That's just an individual cell. One cell equals one organism. There are organisms that are made out of a whole bunch of cells that all kind of work together to form that tissue structure, but it's nothing much past that. For example, sponges. There are organisms that have organs. For example, if I take a look at the jellyfish, they have tentacles and they have like this outer like skin-like structure of tissues, but they don't have organ systems. They don't have complete reproductive tracts. They might just have a cluster of cells that kind of make something that's almost like an ovary or almost like a testy, but no real organ systems. And finally, when you get into the higher organisms, plants, animals, and fungi, you start getting into seeing some organ systems where a whole bunch of different organs come together to make a functional organism. Okay, when we now move up the chain into ecology, which are the ecological levels of organization, we start with an individual. When we have a whole bunch of individuals of the same species, that'll make up your population. When you take into consider all of the populations that have to interact together, that makes a community. And we see a lot of emergent properties with communities, right? Because they're going to interact in different ways than any of the individual populations did on their own. From that, we build up to the ecosystem level, which now is going to include the non-living portions of the environment, as well as all of the living stuff. From there, we can look at biomes. Now, sometimes I kind of skip over this because it's arbitrary, but all the ecosystems on Earth that are similar make up a biome, but that they don't necessarily all interact with other ecosystems that are in the biome. So if you skip that, I'm not too offended. And then finally, the biosphere makes up all places on Earth. Last topic to go over is diversity of life, and you looked at a phylogenetic tree in the book. Here's another example, and what I really want to point out about this is that most life on Earth is prokaryotic. Most life on Earth is like that bacterial type cell. Super duper simple, no membrane bound organelles, and very few organisms on Earth are eukaryotic. And then if we go even further, we'll see that even among the eukaryotes, most are unicellular. So really the only multicellular organisms that we have are plants, animal, and fungi. So we can look at these three big categories of life. For the eukaryotes, they're really broken down, and most of them are unicellular eukaryotic. It's only when we get to the plant, animal, and fungi that we see that there are multicellular eukaryotes. Again, we'll get into that a little bit more. I know that's a lot for right now, but let's talk about your assignment, okay? Okay. What you're going to be doing is making a one-pager. Now, in general, what a one-pager is it's one sheet of paper that's going to act almost like a study guide for you. You have certain information that you display on there to show that you know it, as well as act as a nice little review reminder. So just take what you think is the most important that you want to be reviewing come May so that you're ready for the AP exam. So you're doing one side of the paper, make sure to include a title, a border, it should be colorful, and it should be kind of original. If you can put the pieces together in a way that shows how they're united, then you're in really good shape. And then for this one, you're going to need to also include the specific information for it that you're going to integrate, which is the characteristics of life, levels of organization, and diversity of life, with some images there. Now, if you're not really creative, if you're like, what is she talking about? Here's some general templates that you can use. And if it was me for this specific item, here's what I'm going to recommend. Now, you do not have to follow this template. This is completely optional. But if you find that you need rigid structure, go ahead and start with something like this. Your border is just all the vocabulary. You've got your title. You've got your three different topics broken up like this. And I think that'll give you enough space. Again, it doesn't need to look like this, but if you know that you're somebody that kind of gets stuck, then go ahead and follow this template. To answer your question, yes, you do need to do this on paper. It does need to be hand drawn. So keep that in mind, please. Okay, very last thing that I want to mention is for your research, for your collecting your data for your lab. Where is it? I have created a document. It's in the Unit 0 folder, and it is editable. So what I've done is, as I'm getting responses from different teachers, I've written down who the teacher is, what class period. Like you see right here, Ms. Rafferty has 3 different class periods listed, but they're all period 3 because she has extra time during that period, and she said that she could take a few groups. So each row here is a different slot if you want to go ahead and sign up. I'm going to ask that each group for right now just signs up for one, and you need to contact them. So if you decide that you want Ms. Rafferty's 3rd period to go ahead and fill out one of your surveys, contact her directly through email with the directions of what her kids will need to do, as well as whatever link that you have for them. You see here, Ms. Ziegler's got 3 different periods that she's willing to offer up, and same for Ms. O'Brien. So as I get more responses, I will make sure to update those. If you've got questions, email me, and with that, have fun working on your one-pager.